Hello there and welcome to the Hashpower Academy. My name is Jake Scanlon. I'm the lead educator here at the Academy, and this is a place for you to learn anything to do with Bitcoin and everything to do with Bitcoin, starting with the fundamentals. And the fundamentals of Bitcoin are electricity is converted through Bitcoin mining machines into compute, and that compute adds Bitcoin blocks to the chain. And what is issued in that process? Bitcoin. And so we have these three core commodities of energy, compute, and finance, as in Bitcoin database units, and they are all mathematically linked together. And this is important in the context of today's video about the US Strategic Reserve. And for example, I've made a comparison between the UK and the USA. So right now, the UK has 61,000 Bitcoin, which is 0.29% of the total 21 million. And the USA has 213,000 Bitcoin, which is about roughly 1%. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Okay, the countries of the world all race to accumulate Bitcoin, the data money on the blockchain. What happens? The price in dollar terms races up, but the production floor stays the same or relatively tries to keep up at the rate of physical infrastructure of load center sites of energy being consumed to produce compute, which means loads of microchips from China. So there is this massive race underneath the price of Bitcoin that any significant accumulation from countries is only going to widen the gap between price and production. And that gap is what miners will arbitrage. And this is where it gets interesting. What percentage of this hash rate is in the USA? This isn't a quiz, it's 40%. 40%. In the UK, I'm going to politely write 0 because it's pretty much 0. Now, this is interestingly in a Bitcoin unit of account approach. This is more strategically significant, you could argue, than this. Why? Well, this is the amount of subsidy being distributed per 144 blocks, which is 1 day. And every 210,000 blocks, that cuts in half, the halving event, which happens every 4 years. And it halves again, and 100 years later, there is no Bitcoin being issued as subsidy. And that full 21 million has been distributed. And it gets distributed through compute power. So right now, the UK has none, so it's not earning any of this. And the USA is capturing 40% because it produces 40% of the hash rate, so it's earning approximately 40% of the Bitcoin. And this is important because the other component of subsidy is fees. And fees are effectively a redistribution in the Bitcoin system. It's inefficiency paying to efficiency. And what I mean by that is fees represent some form of consumption. I send you $100 worth of Bitcoin, I pay a $1 fee. That fee, along with all the other fees, and the volume is much larger than the small fee that's paid and redistributed to those producing compute. And so if the USA has 40% of the compute, or they're capturing 40% of transaction fees. The UK is not. Why is this important? Well, you pay Bitcoin to pay a fee. And so there is a natural economic leakage when you consider the UK side of things, where we hold a load of Bitcoin, but it can only be spent. And yes, it's powerful in of itself. It holds all this economic power over these two commodities that are continually expanding underneath this fixed quantity of Bitcoin to reprice the Bitcoin in greater quantities of electricity and compute. Now, what's important for here is, although they own 1% of the supply of Bitcoin, they are redistributing, the network is redistributing Bitcoin through fees and subsidy on top of that. And the US is collecting 40% of it. So the US is experiencing economic inflow because it in a sense, it holds more Bitcoin in greater amount and quantity, yes, but it's also accumulating 40% of what is continually redistributed in the system. And as we transition away from subsidy and more onto fees, and fees represent people of the world all sending and receiving Bitcoin, and those fees are essentially a redistribution mechanism based on efficiency. Well, the UK is going to really suffer because we don't produce compute as a country in a sense, and so we are suffering economic leakage, whilst the US is experiencing the benefit of economic inflow. So the approach of this video is I'm trying to say that the US Strategic Reserve needs to consider the amount of Bitcoin it holds, but also the amount of issuance power, because that's essentially what compute power is. It's issuance. Because with Bitcoin, you pay to store your transaction in a block. When you produce compute power, you produce the blocks. You decide what goes in a block. You hold the pen of the accounting system for 10 minutes. And that ability to issue new Bitcoin into circulation and settle people's transactions or settle your own transactions in your own country, that may be the path of Bitcoin mining pools. Whether you're for or against that, that would be the case, because they will want to retain issuance power within the network. And this is why Bitcoin mining is decentralized. It's smashing the central banking system issuance power into 1,000 pieces, and people are picking it up in 144 blocks per day. And the third component of this is, well, Bitcoin miners, representative here as 800 exahash of compute multiplied by 23.5 joules per terahash. That is converting exahash into megawatts, which comes up with 18.8 gigawatts when you make it even larger in the units. 18.8 gigawatts. That is an insane amount of power. That's the power of an entire country, as the news and media like to say, which means that there's an entire country's worth of energy infrastructure under this network, all across the world. And, well, the US is continually building this out. The US is 40% of that, approximately. And the UK is not. So they are not getting the benefits of grid stability that the miners can offer. Because mining is buy energy, sell Bitcoin, because you've turned the computer on and consume that power that you purchased. But inversely, they can sell the power and buy the Bitcoin with the machine off. They've sold the power, so they've sold the power back to someone else on the grid. But the computer there in the first place is what allows them to get that power contract. And these pieces are very important because it requires Bitcoin mining to be local, because that's where it is. Bitcoin mining is local, and the blockchain is global. And all these different pieces ensure that you have currency units, which if you have compute power, you're earning the issuance of the global monetary network to your local country. So right now, obviously, the UK is suffering Bitcoin unit of account economic leakage, and the US has the benefit of 40% of all the fees going to them. But they also have the grid stability aspect of all the 40% of this power effectively being available to be sold at that theoretical amount. Not every miner is able to sell power, but I do see that path in terms of a strategic Bitcoin reserve acknowledging the energy and compute layers of the network to use the cryptography and security of the Bitcoin blockchain as a communication system to miners all across a country, and actively they can coordinate demand response together on an electrical grid. Pay them for it, they'll do it. It's just computers that can under and overclock with their power. You could design an electricity grid that could be hit by a missile, and the second there's some form of surge or drop in power, you have the machines manage that fluctuation to a grid. That's the extreme sense, but you could also have it in the sense that if there's a massive amount of solar, you've got all these machines that absolutely crank up to the max to consume that excess power. Because from the energy side of things, Bitcoin is effectively a recycling system. It's a mycelium network of energy and finance, but it's a recycling system for wasted energy. All you need is a computer with an internet connection to produce the digital money and a local energy connection. So it's local energy connected to global finance. So yes, it's strategically important to store and own the digital monetary units that reference the entire underlying network and priced against energy at the rate of issuance per day and settlement of fees against that amount of energy. And as more energy joins the network, the price of energy gets cheaper. So who doesn't want stabilized energy on their local electricity grid, which produces and issues and collects global monetary fees as a redistribution system of a fixed supply monetary unit where there's only 21 million, and your country already owns, for my case, 61,000. The US is in a massively strategic position to continue its path, and all it needs to do is coordinate these underlying layers. I don't think the US government should effectively mine Bitcoin beyond producing a few blocks themselves. Maybe they run a mining pool. There's going to be lots of happiness and unhappiness about these sorts of integrations, but Bitcoin is effectively for everyone. Freedom of speech. It's, can your enemy say something you don't like, don't agree with? And if it's in your country, that's civil society, so to speak. When you start breaking that down, such as pausing the SWIFT payment system and every country realizing, oh, we can't trust this anymore, the veil's dropped. And then you've got countries coordinating some form of gold token or whatever it is. But here's the problem. You can't, if someone sends you a gold token, how do you know the gold is in the vault? There is no mathematical or physics connection between the physical atomic chunk of gold in a vault and your digital token. There is only two commodities directly that are digitally native but physically proven: Bitcoin and through compute power. The very cost of spending energy to brute force crack the next block in the chain is what allows you to prove the amount of Bitcoin that you've mined in a block, because you've spent the energy brute force cracking it. So there's a direct alignment between local energy being consumed and global money being produced. And the analogy I'd like to help you remember that forever is if you meet a friend that's just had a child, you see they had a child, you didn't need to, you know they did something, shall we say. You didn't need to see that part. You saw they have a child, so it's the proof of work, so to speak. So Bitcoin does the same in the sense that there is proof that energy has been expended to produce compute, which produces that Bitcoin. And that's a memorable way to think of it. So in terms of US strategic reserve, as a recap, the Bitcoin network being 40% redistributed to the US versus 0% to the UK, it means my country is suffering economic leakage in our Bitcoin unit of account, and the US is continually accumulating more Bitcoin over time, whether it's to their citizens or investors or at the country level. But I wouldn't be surprised if they do dive into Bitcoin mining just for that ability to produce a couple blocks. And that settlement space being very critical to, say, future grid systems that use the cybersecurity applications of compute in the middle as a way of securing the electricity grid by the control systems of the grid only being communicated through the Bitcoin blockchain. And all of that stability of those machines being able to dynamically change the amount of energy that they use to stabilize the grids that have lots of renewables on them. I think that was a different sort of approach for a US strategic reserve to include compute power, but here we are. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.